Hi, my name is Jonathan Sines, and I'm president and attorney for a nonprofit organization called Texas Values. Our organization is working on the Save Women sports issue here in the state of Texas. As a nonprofit law and policy organization for the state of Texas, we exclusively focus on state legislative issues and other issues across the state on religious freedom, marriage and family, and pro-life. But we want to focus today on the Save Women sports issue. And so you might be thinking, what's that issue about, right? Maybe you've heard a little bit about this, right? Where you have men competing in women's sports. You have boys competing in girls' sports, right? You can see the graphic behind me. Are you okay with this, right? This is the classic photo from last summer or last spring when Will or Lia Thomas, whatever he's calling himself, a male swimmer, competed in the women's division at the NCAA championships. You can see on the other side of the photo, the athletes that were sort of off the podium, or at least maybe one of them was not. And so, look, what the reasons are they ended up standing away from each other is debatable. What we know is that Lia Thomas, Will Thomas, a biological male, won NCAA championships in swimming in the women's division. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about him and as we get into this issue, but this video is really about giving you an idea what's going on the Save Women sports issue, what's going on this issue in Texas, and what's going on in the Texas legislative process on this issue. But many people are not okay with this, right? They don't want men competing in women's sports, particularly in the college arena where athletic scholarships can be lost. Opportunities can be lost for young women. Many women who may not have an ability to go to college or to go to particular universities if they don't have that athletic opportunity. Not to mention just how unfair I think a lot of us feel that it is that you have people that are bumped off podiums, right? That lose abilities to compete in particular sports, and not just at swimming, but the swimming issue got a lot of attention. Another reason why this has been important to Texas is because Will Thomas, Lia Thomas, he's from here in Texas. He was a male swimmer at Westlake High School, one of the most well-known high schools in the state of Texas. This is where Nick Foles, a quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles that won the Super Bowl, Drew Brees, a quarterback who won the Super Bowl for the New Orleans Saints. This is where they went to high school. And so in the state of Texas, Westlake High School is very well known. And so right now, though, we're in the middle of the legislative session here in Texas. The legislative session meets every 2 years, every other year, and we're getting pretty close to the end. There's about 4 to 5 weeks, if not a little bit more left. And there are two pieces of legislation on the Save Women sports issue. One is Senate Bill 15, and the other one is House Bill 23. Senate Bill 15, the author is Mays Middleton, Senator Middleton, in his first session as a senator. He was a Texas House member before. And also Valerie Swanson is carrying House Bill 23. Now, the bills, I don't think are the exact same language, but they are very similar in trying to accomplish the same goal, which is to solve the problem of not having men competing in women's sports. And we see it growing. We see more and more concern around this issue as we're hearing more and more women that are getting comfortable coming forward and getting confident about speaking out. A big reason for that is because people like Riley Gaines, she is a competitive NCAA swimmer and a championship swimmer, an NCAA winning championship swimmer from the University of Kentucky. Now, she's no longer there. I think the last time she was competing was last year, last athletic season. She was forced to compete against Lia Thomas or Will Thomas, whatever he was calling himself at that point. She was forced to compete against Will Thomas. He was competing in the women's division. And we got a video. If you go to SaveWomenSportsTexas.com, you can hear more about that particular story. But Riley was forced to compete against him, and they actually tied. And from what we hear from Riley, they only gave out one trophy. They gave the trophy to Will Thomas that day, or Lia Thomas, as he was calling himself, during the competitions. And she was told, oh, your trophy will be sent in the mail. And I believe she wasn't even allowed to stand on the podium. What we were hearing from Riley is that was for photo purposes. The NCAA, whoever was there, they wanted that image of Lia Thomas there with the trophy and not Riley Gaines, the competitive female swimmer. And so this issue has been growing, and Texas is not the only state to deal with it. Okay. I think there are close to 14 states that have already passed laws at the collegiate level on this issue. Now, Texas is not new to this issue. We did pass a bill last legislative session in 2021, protecting girls from having boys compete against them in competitive sports from kindergarten through 12th grade. And it was actually during a special session. It was tried several times in a regular session, but they didn't get everything accomplished during the regular session. So they went into special session, and I don't remember if it was the second or third special session, but it took several times, other issues that were being dealt with, but this bill did get done, and that was carried by Valerie Swanson, who's now carrying the House version again for the collegiate level. So it's good to have some continuity, as you would say, on this issue. But, since a year from removed from that, we've seen more and more attention on this issue. There was also already a concern at the K through 12 level last summer or spring when Lia Thomas competed in the women's division. That drew a lot more concern. And some of that is because how people are continuing to almost glorify it, if you will. But let me back up for a second and talk about Senate Bill 15 and House Bill 23 so you know what's going on in Texas on this issue. Senate Bill 15, the Senate version of the Save Women's Sports Bill, has already passed the Senate. It's been made a priority item by the Lieutenant Governor, who, by the way, has expressed his support for this piece of legislation. He also spent some time with Riley Gaines when she was here at the state legislature at the Texas Capitol for the Faith and Family Day by Texas Values and other groups. She was testifying in favor of that. The timing worked out. She met with the Lieutenant Governor that day. He had already expressed his support and made this issue a priority item. But the timing was great because while we were there that day, that I believe was March 13th, on Monday, Riley was able to testify in the Texas Senate in favor of this piece of legislation. And that's what she's doing. She's going around a lot of states, speaking in favor of these pieces of legislation at Congress and speaking at a lot of events, many of them on college campuses. But there's also a House version. So, the Senate bill passed the committee. It passed the full Senate and is now over in the House, I believe, in the House Higher Education Committee. House Bill 23 has not had any movement yet in the House. I think there's some thinking that it'll probably be the Senate version that'll move through the House. So that bill doesn't have to go over to the Senate because the Senate's already voted on this issue with the Senate version. And so whether it's a House bill or Senate bill, it's got to go through both chambers. Senate Bill 15's already gone through one chamber, just needs to go through the House. So our understanding, though, is the House version of the Save Women's Sports Bill, it already has signatures or people that have signed on as co-authors demonstrating their support. All the Republican members of the Higher Education Committee in the House have already said they support the bill. So you would imagine once that bill gets a hearing that you're going to have the majority of the support because that committee is majority Republican, and that issue should move forward with some success. But we're not there yet. And the legislative session ends at the end of May, but there are some deadlines that come into play long before the end of May. So we want to keep that bill moving. But this bill has garnered a tremendous amount of support. We have had a number of groups that have signed on. I don't know what the official number is, but I think we're going to have a graphic put up. You can see some of those organizations. And so you can see all the graphics of the different wonderful organizations. If you know of an organization that you think needs to be supporting the Save Women's Sports Bill in the state of Texas, send an email to them, send an email to us at info@txvalues.org. We can help get that group or those groups or specific leaders added to that graphic and list. And that's a growing list. This issue continues to get a lot of support. As a matter of fact, in the House, 81 of the 150 House members have already signed on to the House version, which I imagine would also transfer to the Senate version as well. So there's already a demonstrated on paper majority support for the Save Women's Sports Act in the state of Texas. Not to mention, Governor Abbott has also indicated his support for this legislation, as well as Lieutenant Governor. Governor Abbott spent some time with Riley Gaines on that March 13th day when she was in town at the Texas Capitol, had a wonderful meeting at the governor's mansion. Governor Abbott, it was clear, is very knowledgeable and up to date on this issue and was very excited to post on social media his support for this issue. And so, but, listen, to have her testify at the state legislature, allowed for our elected officials to hear someone who has had to deal with this issue, who was forced to compete against a man, Lia Thomas, Will Thomas, he was calling himself before, in the NCAA championships, and they actually tied. I mean, that's how great of a swimmer Riley is, okay? I believe she qualified or was invited to be at the Olympic trials. She was one of the best in the world during that time period as a collegiate swimmer in those particular events. Lia Thomas, Will Thomas was 462 in the world when he was competing in the male division. Then went over to the women's division, and now all of a sudden he's at the top of the trophy podium. So we know that's going to be a continued concern. But one of the things Riley talks about it's not only the competitive side and the opportunities that women are going to lose if we don't get a hold on this and have some common sense in our state laws and national laws for that matter as well, is the impact that it has on young women when you have these men undressed next to them or in their presence in the locker room. Riley Gaines has talked about this and said none of the young ladies, none of the female athletes were told ahead of time that a male athlete was going to come into their locker room and change. He just was allowed to go in there. Leah Thomas was allowed to go in there and undress. And, you know, you can imagine the impact that had on them. They're getting ready to compete at the highest level in college at the NCAA championships, and all of a sudden they're shocked, they're thrown off guard, they're surprised by a man coming in and undressing, because that's what they do in the locker room, right? When they're getting ready to compete. And from what we understand, from what we're hearing, nothing has changed as far as his anatomy, okay? So his hair has grown longer. Maybe that's about it. I don't know what other drugs he might have been taking, but as far as the anatomy, none of that has changed. And that's concerning. And, you know, that issue's sort of getting overlooked, right? It's sort of just suggested that, oh, you know, women are going to be okay with that. It's not that big of a deal, you know, as long as they're not being assaulted. That's what we're hearing a lot. People on the left or people that aren't supportive of this issue. And let me mention that for just a second. This issue has bipartisan support. We see people that are on the left and the right that have said, hey, this makes sense. This is common sense. We've seen lesbian and gay people that have said, hey, we agree. We don't think that men should be competing against women in sports. This is not what we fought for in Title IX. That's what many of them said. Martina Navratilova, other athletes, other notable figures that have come forward and talked about this issue. If you haven't seen that, it's pretty well documented on social media. But they're just expected, and some people are suggesting, well, you know, they're not being assaulted. You know, they're not being harassed. I mean, you know, they just have to stand next to or be close to some, you know, male that's going, some male athlete that's going to undress. Oh, that's not a big deal. It is a big deal. That there's a reason why for so long we've had those separate facilities, because it's uncomfortable for women to be in that setting. And the fact that they're not telling women ahead of time, in my opinion, is evidence they don't think it's that big of a deal, or they don't respect women and their own privacy enough to say, hey, are you okay with this? Why? Because many of them are not. And they just sort of act like we're going to just do this and get away with it. And so, but look, there are a lot of differences between men and women when we look at not only athletics, we look at science, we look at biology. It is well demonstrated. And there's been a lot of great testimony on that issue. And so I want to make sure that people are aware of that. You want some information about some of those statistics and those key scientific facts that we know are those differences between male and female, particularly at the collegiate level. You know, and I'm not saying the arguments are stronger when people are younger, but as they get older, particularly competitive athletics at the collegiate level, there is a huge difference, not only in statistically on average, the differences between male and female physically, but also just their capacity, right? To hold a certain amount of oxygen to compete at such a high level. So we got some good information we want to share with you on that. And by the way, if you've not heard of our group, or you have and you don't have our app, this is a way to stay connected on what's happening at our state legislature. Download that Texas Values app. We're really excited to get that going. We've got some great information on the bottom there of the app. There's some little tabs you can click to find out what bills we're working on, how they're moving, what's the latest. There's also our legislative guide. So if you go to the Texas Capitol and you want to navigate around and find out what's going on, you can download that digital version of our legislative guide to get you around the Capitol and get all the phone numbers and emails for the elected officials to stay in touch with them. And as a matter of fact, if you come to the Capitol, our office is 1 block away. We are across the street from the Capitol at 1005 Congress, Suite 830. Come by, call us, send us an email, set something up ahead of time, or say hello when you're in town. We would love to help you. You know, our organization, we have someone at the Capitol every day of the legislative session. That's not just this year. That's every year that we've worked at the legislative session starting in 2013. Myself, I've been doing work at the Capitol since 2005, not only as a lawyer, but also as an advocate. We do just about everything in the legislative process except vote on the House and Senate floor and sign bills into legislation into law, which the governor does, or veto pieces of legislation, which the governor does. But everything else, we testify. We provide legal analysis. We have people that come and testify, and we help them get ready for their testimony. People like Riley Gaines and others. And people that live in the area or live in different parts of the state of Texas. With 254 counties, people come from all over the state to our state capital in Austin. And so we could help you get ready as well if you want to be a little bit more a part of the process. And we say it all the time. Government belongs to those who show up. You got to show up. And look, it's great also to have presence on social media, which we do. Our Facebook page has one of the largest followings of any organization in the state of Texas that works on these issues. We got, I think, 255,000 followers or fans, whatever it's being called now, on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. So it is good to have that presence on social media. But that in-person contact, actually going to the Capitol, talking in person to your state legislator, we know how to put you in the position to do that, right? So if you want some tips and some strategies on to do that, how to do that, you're going to get some of the best information from us. But when you show up in person, you're able to testify. And look, sometimes it doesn't look real good when they have a legislative hearing and one person testifies in favor of a bill and then like 50 people against, right? And that's not always everything. Sometimes it's not as relevant. You only need a certain amount of people to make your case. But my point is, there is some value to showing up in person at the Capitol and testifying, right? Or signing your name up in favor, for, or against a piece of legislation. We can help you do that and help you navigate through the legislature system so you can be in touch. I tell you what, when we had the hearing on the Save Women Sports Bill in the Senate, the turnout and support was enormous. We had, I think, more people than the other side did, if you will, or it was pretty close. And that's difficult to do sometimes in the city of Austin, where a lot of folks that oppose some of these issues live close by. But we turned out huge numbers. A lot of people testified. Several athletes made it clear. I got to testify. I don't always testify on every piece of legislation. We've got a team of people on our policy team. We have 4 people that are involved in the policy efforts at the state capitol directly. And so I don't always testify on everything. Sometimes, it depends on the circumstances, the timing, my availability. I'm not one of the people there that's every day. There are 2 members of our team that are there every day, Mary Elizabeth Castle and Jonathan Covey, who's our policy director. Mary Elizabeth Castle is our director of government relations. And so they're there every day. And then our legislative intern, Megan Benton, is there quite often as well. But I do go to the Capitol quite often. But I was able to testify in support of this legislation. And I believe I was one of the last. It was a late night. And what an incredible opportunity. I do have a teenage daughter who competes in athletics and different performances. And so I was happy to do that. But listen, we got a lot of work left to do on this issue. We are getting a lot of support. And so I'm encouraged by that, but you can't take anything for granted at the state capitol. They say it a lot of times at the Capitol. It's easier to kill a bill than it is to pass a bill. And unfortunately, I've seen that happen so often, where maybe people take for granted or they're not anticipating something. We try to anticipate everything we can to be in a position to be successful. One of the ways that we try to do that is by trying to get to the finish line earlier and not waiting towards some of those deadlines. And so that's where the Save Women's Sports Issues position. We are in a position where it could be passed very soon. Senate Bill 15 is the Senate version. The House bill is House Bill 23. We expect it's likely that the Senate bill is going to be the one that continues to move because it's already passed the Senate and now it's over in the House. But have you contacted your legislator? If you live in the state of Texas, have you let them know how you feel on this issue? Because sometimes what we think is, well, if there's a lot of support for it, then we're okay. I'm only going to call if I need to oppose something or complain. That's not true. Calling your legislator to say thank you, calling one of those 81 Republicans that have said they support it, that adds a lot of weight too. They know, okay, my constituents have my back when I cast this vote. And I do think we're continuing to see more and more momentum on this issue, but still, these issues are going to get a lot of attention. The opposition is going to be very loud. The media is going to try to skew it differently a lot of times. And it's going to be significant. And it's not like Texas is the first state to do this. 14 other states have passed things at the collegiate level. I think if you count K through 12, we're at 18, and that includes Texas. By the way, I almost forgot. I got this great swim cap, okay? If you come to one of our events, speaking of events, on May 5th, Riley Gaines is going to be in Fort Worth at one of our events. We've got this wonderful event set up where Riley Gaines, the collegiate female swimmer and athlete who's leading the Save Women's Sports Issue, who was forced to compete against a man in competitive swimming at the NCAA championships. She's going to be speaking at May 5th, on May 5th at the Worthington Texas Values event. We're just about sold out, okay? So you want to get your tickets now. Go to txvalues.org so you can find out information about that. But listen, if you want to get more involved in this, contact your legislator, contact your senator, your House member, let them know that you support this legislation. The more they hear from that, the more that they're going to continue to feel confident about moving this issue forward. We know the governor's already ready to sign it. He's already said so. We just need to get it at his desk. But the sooner that happens, it minimizes the likelihood that we're going to see some type of, procedural maneuver or whatever, some point of order that the other side or people will try to pull. And so I'm just checking my notes here because we've had several slides here. I want to make sure that I mention on these different issues. And so, look, I mean, if you look at some of the photos of Riley versus Will or Lia Thomas, you can tell a huge physical difference, right? And that's not any different from a lot of other athletes. It is unfair. It's not right for men to have this type of advantage and to be allowed to compete in women's sports. And, my experience on this is the law is a teacher. Okay, what we say in law says where we are as a society and where certain boundaries and lines are drawn. If you don't have it in state law, considering how much activity there's been around this issue, how much push there's been by some people to say, we think this is okay. We think you should allow men to continue to compete in women's sports, or men who decide to call themselves a woman, right? Many of them don't even really go through any changes. It's just something in their mind or in their emotions that they feel. They don't actually go through any type of anatomy or changes. And even if some of them do, it really doesn't minimize or change a whole lot of the advantage that they have. But my point is, we only have a limited amount of time to get state law. That means we got to wait another 2 years, a year and a half, if you will, to start on this issue and to get something passed if we don't get something done now. But if you want to make a difference, sometimes that's what you've got to do. You've got to make it clear in state law. That's why we put so much focus on this issue. And that's not all there is to do. We need to continue to educate people about this issue and why there's a concern and how more and more women are coming forward. And more of them are coming under attack. We saw what happened to Riley Gaines, right? She's been talking about this issue around the country. This was, I believe, at San Francisco State University. She was physically attacked. I think for like 3 hours, she was in a room or in a corner, even though that there was law enforcement or security there. And at one point, there's some footage that suggests that the opposition, some of these trans activists, were asking for money, like it was a ransom situation. Pay us, and then we'll let Riley go, okay? So it's just out of control. And we've got to have something in state law that makes it clear where Texas is on this issue and to let young women know that we stand with them. One of the statistics that we've come across is that a very high percentage, well over a majority of women that are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies have an athletic competitive background in college and high school sports. We know there's a direct connection on women being successful as they move forward with their future. And so, listen, you want more information about this? SaveWomenSportsTexas.com is the website that we have set up. You can find out all that information. You can keep up with this issue. You can share this video. If you haven't subscribed to our page, where is it on this side? Go ahead and do that so we can continue to keep you updated when we post new content on this important issue. But we're almost out of time to make sure that we can pass the Save Women's Sports issue, Senate Bill 15 or House Bill 23 at the Texas Capitol. And so, listen, that's what we do best at Texas Values. So we're going to continue working on this issue, but we really would love your help. And I think with your help together, that's how we can protect faith, family, and freedom in Texas. So thanks for following along with us on this video, and we hope to have more content and updates on this issue soon.